So I guess the question is, I asked Sharon about the focusing on the hunting, trapping, shooting industry, ammunition. Where was the genesis of that focus on that group? Is it because it's a thriving industry that's bringing in a large amount of revenue that they? Oh, I'll let you answer that.
Again, it's a service that's non-core, that is optional for people. Taxing any service in particular has issues. I mean, any sort of changes you make in the economy as you expand a base. I will say on the surcharge for guns and ammunition, there's also a negative externality with that. The federal government also has a similar sized tax on guns and ammunition because there's an effect in society of guns and ammunition besides the obvious recreational use that should be accounted for when on dealing with society.
Which is what? What were you referring to?
The negative effect of guns,
yes.
And ammunition.
Yes, sir.
Well, the number of firearm deaths that are in society are probably the largest.
Okay, so that taken into consideration, what about automobile accidents and stuff like that? Could we tax that?
Yeah, we certainly do.
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of a moot point in my opinion, but I understand. One other thing about the, so this is not an excise tax, correct?
Well,
is this so we already have the excise tax on the ammunition, the federal excise tax?
So there is an excise tax.
Correct. 11%, right?
And guns, 10%, correct.
I thought it was 11%, but 10%.
Oh, it's 10 to 11 federal. We're
correct.
Proposing 10.
Correct. So we got 11% federal, 7% state, and then we're going to propose another 10%.
That's correct.
So that's 11. That's quite a bit. So. So again, my question is, what? I guess I'm just kind of surprised that we're focusing on the firearms industry with the gun clubs when there's so many other places. I mean, it's a thriving industry, so I'm assuming that's why that you guys are you understand. There's a lot of money coming in. There's many ranges coming up. Many people buying ammunition, buying firearms. I think this is going to have. Did you guys look into the ramifications of taxing firearms and gun ranges as far as people buying firearms or ammunition online, out of state, leaving the state? I've had some people say that every time they're going to look at this, I'm assuming this tax is going to, when you get a receipt, when you buy a firearm, is it going to say 10% firearms tax on the receipt?
Yeah. So
I think so that's going to be like I think every time someone, I can't say exactly what they said because I'm on record here, but every time they see that, it's gonna be kind of a black eye on Rhode Island and their reflection on Rhode Island because it's another 10%. So every time they look at that receipt, it's gonna be one more reason for them to buy something out of state, or it might be the threshold to push people out of state. Is there a fiscal note on the possible ramifications of people leaving the state because of this, or buying out of state because of this?
So the revenue estimate does not specifically look at individuals or numbers of persons. It was reduced sizably, I will tell you, because to take into account, particularly as Sharon had noted, long guns and your ability to purchase those items and transport them across state lines versus a handgun, which my understanding is requires to be delivered to a registered firearms dealer for purchase. So it was marked down considerably, probably on the order of 30 to 40% of the revenue, based on the fact that there would be some amount of activity that would be not able to be taxed as easily simply because people could buy, for example, a long gun or a shotgun or something like that over state lines and bring it back into the state, and be harder for us to know that they have done that. Would not relieve them of the liability, the tax liability, but it would just be harder for us to collect.
Okay, and as far as collecting, that's my second question, if I may, Chairman.
Yes.
Implementation and expenses for the division of taxation. Looks like staffing is going to be 0.3 million with a revenue of 14.4 million. Is that based on the revenue that? What is that based on as far as the staff compared to the revenues? Is that based on? Well, what is that based on?
So there is a certain amount, to the director's earlier point.
Yep.
There is a point in time. So for example, the easiest thing to do is raise a rate, right? If you raise the rate of something, you don't need any extra staff because you're not changing anything other than what it's going to be multiplied against. When you go to expand a base, you need to bring on additional personnel to help with the compliance. For example, there's a group here who've never had to pay sales tax, don't know how to fill out sales tax forms, et cetera,
Right.
To some extent, and that there's a lot of outreach that has to go on to educate the public as to who's liable and what they have to pay. And then we obviously have compliance functions that would follow on to that require extra personnel, since the rest of the people in taxation are working on the other taxes we collect. So whenever you expand the base, you would expect to see an expansion in some staffing to handle the new tax base that's being administered.
So it's going to be the responsibility of this new staffing to enforce to generate this 14.4 or part of it to
Not
cover it's so it's going to be some more bureaucrats
Not quite that directly,
generating more.
but for example, in a purchase where somebody's compliant and collects and remits the tax as they are required to do by law, we don't need extra staffing for someone like that. They're compliant.
Right.
The extra staffing is to ensure compliance. We do have a voluntary tax system here, right? So the extra staffing is to ensure compliance.
Okay, because
You know
this
what I
is
mean?
not voluntary. This is not voluntary. It's mandatory because it's an additional 10%.
The compliance is voluntary.
The compliance is voluntary.
So we have to have people to enforce compliance. That's common in all tax systems in the United States.
Right. So part of that 10% is going to part of that collection of the 10% tax on firearms and ammunition and gun ranges is going to go to the enforcement of that. So the people are paying for the taxes to be collected from them. Is that correct?
So it's not that direct, but essentially.
It's not?
We need some additional as I said, we need some additional resources to support the various taxes we're putting on.
Right, and that's part of that 10% is going to pay the 0.3 million to collect the 14.4 million. So,
It's not that direct, but there's a variety of other taxes we're putting into place too that require compliance, that require education, that require marketing, social media. So it's just not the ammunition surcharge and the tax on the hunting and shooting ranges. That's why I'm saying it's not that direct.
okay, all right, so, yeah, right, so part of it will be focused on going to the gun store, making sure they're compliant, going to the gun range, making sure they're compliant, go to the gun, anything to do with the firearm industry to make sure they're compliant. So it's oversight of the firearm industry, not in the industry, but the firearms
So
community in Rhode Island
we would put
through
forth our-
taxation. Sorry.
That's okay. So we would put forth our compliance programs just like we do for every other tax that we have, be it income, sales, business taxes. It's not, we're not going to put a large focus, and it's not, I don't I don't feel it's Big Brother type of a situation, but there is a compliance component to it, yes.
Okay, I